The chapel fell silent as they lowered the flag over the casket. Then the German shepherd started barking, his cries echoing off the stone walls. Everyone assumed it was heartbreak, but when his paws began clawing desperately at the polished wood, when his bark turned to something wild and urgent, the truth became clear. What Bandit was trying to tell them would reveal a miracle so impossible, it would leave every person in that room shaken to their core. Before we dive in, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And honestly, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these incredible stories reach. Today they gathered to honor Airman Bradley, a decorated service member, a devoted husband, and the partner to one remarkable German shepherd. Near the open casket sat Bandit, Bradley's loyal canine companion. His tan and black coat gleamed in the filtered light, but his dark eyes were fixed, unblinking, on the man in the crisp Air Force uniform. At first, Bandit simply whimpered, a soft, mourning sound that broke hearts throughout the chapel. People nodded knowingly. Of course the dog was grieving. Of course he missed his partner. Then everything changed. Bandit rose to his feet, every muscle in his body tense. His ears shot forward, razor sharp and alert. His tail went rigid. A low, rumbling growl built in his chest, then exploded into sharp, frantic barking, loud, desperate, piercing through the sacred silence like an alarm. Heads turned. Mourners shifted uncomfortably in the pews. Lieutenant Cruz, standing at attention near the casket, reached down to steady Bandit. "Easy, boy. Easy." But Bandit twisted away from his touch. Instead, he lunged forward, his front paws hitting the edge of the casket with a thud. His claws scraped against the wood as he stretched upward, barking directly at Bradley's chest. Confused whispers rippled through the crowd. Bradley's widow covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock. This wasn't normal. Bandit had been through dozens of ceremonies, always disciplined, always composed. This behavior was something else entirely. The barking intensified, sharp, insistent, unrelenting. Some mourners exchanged uncomfortable glances, attributing it to the overwhelming stress of loss. Others wondered if military dogs could sense death in ways humans couldn't understand. But several officers in the crowd, veterans who'd worked with K-9 units for years, felt something stir in their guts. There was a quality to Bandit's bark they recognized. It wasn't distress. It wasn't confusion. It was an alert. The same focused, urgent intensity a working dog displays when he's detected something critical, when he's on mission. Lieutenant Cruz felt it too. He'd handled enough K-9s to know the difference between grief and signal. He stepped closer, kneeling beside Bandit. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly, placing a firm hand on the dog's shoulders. But Bandit didn't calm. He didn't back down. Instead, he barked again, sharper this time, his nose jabbing toward a specific spot on Bradley's uniform, right at the cluster of medals pinned above his heart. Then the behavior shifted. Bandit stopped barking and began pacing in tight, agitated circles around the casket. He whined, high-pitched and anxious, sniffing frantically along the satin-lined edges. He returned to the same spot, paused, tapped his paw against the side panel twice. Cruz's breath caught, because in that moment of silence between Bandit's cries, he heard it. A sound, faint, muffled, barely audible over the rustling of the mourners. A tiny, fragile cry. Cruz's face went pale. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned sharply to the funeral director standing nearby. "Open it," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Gasps erupted throughout the chapel. People leaned forward in their seats. The funeral director blinked, stammering. Lieutenant, this is highly irregular. Protocol requires—" "Open it now," Cruz commanded, his voice cutting through the room like steel. The morning had begun with the kind of stillness that only grief can create. Outside the chapel, a cold wind swept across the military cemetery, bending the grass in waves and rattling the branches of ancient oak trees. Inside, rows of polished wooden pews filled slowly with mourners dressed in black, their faces carved with sorrow. Some wore uniforms, their medals catching the dim light filtering through stained glass windows. Others clutched tissues, their eyes already red and swollen. At the front of the chapel, draped in the American flag, sat the casket of Airman First Class Bradley. The flag's crisp folds created perfect triangles, each crease a testament to honor and sacrifice. Flanking the casket stood two uniformed officers at rigid attention, their white gloves stark against their dress blues. Above them, a portrait of Bradley smiled down, forever young, forever proud in his Air Force uniform. The chaplain's voice rose and fell in solemn prayer, his words echoing through the vaulted ceiling. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of a life cut short but lived with purpose. He spoke of a hero who had served his country with unwavering dedication, who had left behind a grieving widow and countless brothers and sisters in arms. Each word seemed to press down on the assembled mourners like a physical weight. But it was the figure beside the casket that drew every eye, every broken heart. Bandit sat perfectly still at first, his tan and black coat brushed to gleaming perfection. Someone had fastened a black band around his collar, a mark of respect for a fallen handler. His ears, normally alert and rotating at every sound, lay flat against his skull. His dark eyes, usually bright with intelligence and energy, were fixed on the casket with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. Those who had known Bradley and Bandit as a team remembered how inseparable they'd been. On base, Bandit had followed Bradley everywhere, his shadow and protector. During training exercises, they'd moved as one unit, perfectly synchronized. Off duty, Bradley would sit on the barrack steps with Bandit's head resting on his knee, talking to the dog as if he were a brother. And Bandit had listened, his eyes never leaving Bradley's face, his tail thumping a steady rhythm of devotion. Now Bandit sat alone. His body trembled occasionally, small shivers running through his muscular frame. His breathing came in short, shallow pants that misted in the cool air. Once he let out a soft whine, barely audible above the chaplain's voice, and the sound cracked through the chapel like breaking glass. Bradley's widow, seated in the front row, covered her face with her hands. Lieutenant Cruz, standing near the back with other canine handlers, watched Bandit with growing concern. He'd seen military dogs mourn before. He'd witnessed their confusion, their depression, their refusal to eat or work after losing their handlers. But there was something different in Bandit's posture, something Cruz couldn't quite identify. The dog wasn't just mourning, he was waiting, watching, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. The first bark shattered the reverent silence like a gunshot. Bandit's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. The soft whimper that had been building in his throat exploded into a sharp, piercing bark that ricocheted off the chapel walls. Then another. And another, each one louder, more desperate, more urgent than the last. The chaplain stumbled over his words, his prayer faltering. Mourners jerked in their seats, turning to stare at the German shepherd. Some gasped. Others whispered frantically to their neighbors. But Bandit didn't stop. He lunged forward, his powerful haunches propelling him toward the casket. His front paws slammed against the polished wood with a hollow thud, his claws scraping frantically at the surface. He stretched upward, nearly standing on his hind legs, barking directly into the casket with a raw, primal intensity that sent chills down every spine in the room. "Someone control that dog!" an elderly woman in the third row hissed. The chaplain raised a hand, trying to restore order. "Please, if we could just—" But his voice was drowned out by Bandit's relentless barking. The dog's eyes were wild now, his lips pulled back to reveal white teeth. His entire body shook with the force of his cries. One of the honor guard officers broke formation and moved toward Bandit, reaching for his collar. "Easy, boy, come on now." But the moment his fingers touched the black band around Bandit's neck, the dog twisted violently away, never breaking his focus on the casket. Bradley's widow stood halfway from her seat, her face pale and stricken. "He's never done this," she said, her voice trembling. "Never. Not once." "It's the grief," someone murmured from the crowd. "Poor thing doesn't understand." "He's having a breakdown," another voice added. "Dogs can't process death like we do." The funeral director appeared from the side door, his expression tight with barely concealed irritation. He approached Bandit with professional calm, pulling a leash from his pocket. "I'm terribly sorry, everyone. Let me just remove him from—" Bandit's bark turned guttural, desperate. He pawed at the casket again, his claws leaving faint scratches on the wood. Then he did something that made several mourners gasp aloud. He placed both paws on the edge of the casket and thrust his muzzle inside, his nose driving toward Bradley's chest where the metals gleamed in the soft light. His bark became a howl, echoing through the chapel like a siren. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Lieutenant Cruz's blood turned to ice. He'd spent 7 years working with K9 units, 7 years learning the language of military working dogs, understanding their signals, decoding their behavior. And in that moment, as Bandit's howl pierced through the chapel, Cruz heard something that made his training kick in like muscle memory. That wasn't grief. It was an alert. The pitch was different. The rhythm was different. The focused, laser-like intensity in Bandit's eyes as he targeted that specific spot on Bradley's chest was the same look Cruz had seen 100 times during narcotics detection, bomb sweeps, and search and rescue operations. Bandit wasn't breaking down. He was working. Cruz was moving before his mind fully processed the thought. His boots echoed on the marble floor as he strode down the center aisle, his jaw set, his eyes locked on Bandit. Mourners turned to watch him, confusion etched on their faces. The funeral director stepped forward, one hand raised. "Lieutenant, please." "This isn't—" Cruz brushed past him without a word. "Sir, I must insist that we maintain proper decorum. If you could just allow me to—" "Step aside," Cruz said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command. The funeral director's mouth opened, then closed. Something in Cruz's expression, the hard certainty in his eyes, made him take a step back. Cruz reached the casket and dropped to one knee beside Bandit. The dog's barking didn't stop, but his tail gave a single, sharp wag when he sensed Cruz's presence. Recognition. Relief. Finally, someone who understood. "What have you got, boy?" Cruz murmured, his voice low and calm despite the hammering of his heart. He placed a steady hand on Bandit's shoulder, feeling the tension coiled in every muscle. "Show me." Bandit's bark sharpened to a staccato rhythm. He jerked his head toward the casket, his nose jabbing repeatedly at Bradley's uniform jacket. Right where the metals created a small raised cluster over his heart, the chapel had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was fixed on Cruz and Bandit. Even the chaplain had stopped speaking, his Bible hanging forgotten in his hands. Cruz stood slowly, his eyes scanning the casket's interior. Bradley lay peaceful, his hands folded across his stomach, his face composed in eternal rest. The flag draped perfectly over the lower half of the casket. The metals gleamed in perfect rows. Nothing looked out of place. But Bandit wasn't wrong. In all his years working with K9s, Cruz had learned one immutable truth. When a trained dog alerts, you listen. You don't question, you don't dismiss, you investigate. Cruz leaned closer, his hand hovering over the metals. That's when he felt it. Warmth, faint but unmistakable, rising from beneath the fabric of Bradley's uniform jacket, concentrated right where Bandit had been pointing. Cruz's breath caught in his throat. His fingers moved to the metals, trembling slightly. "Dear God," he whispered. Cruz pulled his hand back, his mind racing. He needed to think. He needed to be sure. This was impossible. It had to be some trick of the lighting, some residual heat from the chapel's heating system, something rational and explainable. He turned to Bandit, gripping the dog's collar firmly. "Easy now. Let me just—" But Bandit exploded into motion. The German Shepherd wrenched free from Cruz's grasp with surprising strength, his entire body coiling like a spring. He lunged back toward the casket, his nose driving forward with pinpoint precision. Not at Bradley's face, not at his hands, but at that exact spot on his chest, right beneath the cluster of silver and bronze medals. Bandit's wet nose pressed against the fabric, and he let out a sharp, insistent whine. Then he did it again, and again. Each time his muzzle targeted the same precise location with the accuracy of a laser sight. "Lieutenant Cruz, I really must ask you to step away now." The funeral director's voice had taken on an edge of desperation. He moved closer, reaching past Cruz toward Bandit. "This has gone far enough. The family is distressed, and we have a schedule to—" "Don't touch him!" Cruz snapped, his eyes never leaving Bandit. The director's face flushed red. "I'm sorry, but I am responsible for maintaining the dignity of the service. This disruption is completely unacceptable. And if you don't remove that animal immediately, I'll have no choice but to—" Bandit's bark cut through his words like a blade. But this time, it was different, sharper, more urgent. The bark of a dog who'd found what he was searching for and needed his handler to understand right now. Cruz watched as Bandit shifted his approach. The dog stopped barking and began pawing delicately at the edge of Bradley's jacket, his claws hooking into the fabric just below the metals. Not scratching, not damaging, just pulling, gently but insistently, as if trying to peel back a layer. The mourners were standing now, craning their necks to see. Whispers filled the chapel like a rising tide. "What's happening? Why won't they stop him? Someone call security." Bradley's widow stood frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Bradley's father gripped the pew until his knuckles turned white. Cruz made his decision. He straightened, squaring his shoulders, and looked directly at the funeral director. His voice came out calm, steady, and absolutely unyielding. "Open the casket. Now." "Absolutely not. There's something alive in there." The words hung in the air like thunder. The funeral director's face went from red to white in an instant. That's absurd. I personally prepared—" "Open it," Cruz repeated louder this time. "Or I will." Gasps erupted throughout the chapel. Someone screamed. Cruz didn't wait for permission. He leaned over the casket, his hands moving with deliberate care toward the spot Bandit had indicated. The German Shepherd finally fell silent, his body quivering with tension as he watched Cruz's every movement. His tail stood rigid, his eyes tracking Cruz's hands like a hawk watching prey. "Lieutenant, I'm warning you," the funeral director began, but his voice trailed off as Cruz's fingers reached the metals. Cruz's hands hovered over Bradley's chest. Up close, he could see it now. A slight irregularity in the drape of the uniform jacket, a subtle rise beneath the fabric that wasn't quite natural, and that warmth, definitely warmth, radiating from beneath the heavy wool. His heart hammered against his ribs. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But Bandit's eyes told him otherwise. With hands that had steadied under enemy fire, Cruz carefully lifted the edge of Bradley's dress jacket. The metals clinked softly as he moved them aside. Beneath the outer layer was the crisp white uniform shirt, and beneath that, movement. Cruz froze. His breath stopped in his lungs. There, nestled in the fold between Bradley's shirt and his undershirt, was something impossibly small. something that rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths, something covered in fur the color of dark chocolate and cream. Cruz's fingers trembled as he gently peeled back the final layer of fabric. A puppy. A newborn German Shepherd puppy, no bigger than Cruz's hand, lay curled against Bradley's still chest. Its eyes were barely open, clouded with the film of infancy. Its tiny paws were tucked beneath its body, and its miniature tail curled around itself for warmth. The puppy's ribs expanded and contracted with each precious breath, its pink tongue visible between needle-sharp baby teeth. "Oh my God," Cruz breathed, the words barely audible. The puppy stirred at the sound, letting out a weak, mewling cry. The sound was thin and fragile, like wind through dry grass. It was the sound they'd heard before, muffled by layers of fabric and the weight of metals and mourning. The chapel erupted. Mourners surged to their feet, some rushing forward, others stumbling backward in shock. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of disbelief. "Is that a puppy? How is that possible? Was it there the whole time?" The funeral director stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. Bandit pushed past Cruz, his large head hovering over the casket. He whined softly, urgently, his nose touching the tiny puppy with infinite gentleness. The puppy responded with another weak cry, its little head turning toward Bandit's warmth. Cruz carefully, reverently lifted the puppy from its hiding place. The tiny creature fit in his palm, weighing almost nothing. It was cold, far too cold, its body heat fading despite Bradley's attempt to keep it warm. "Someone get a blanket," Cruz commanded, his voice cracking. "Now!" Bradley's widow appeared at his side, tears streaming down her face, her hands reaching out. Is it alive?" "Yes," Cruz said, his voice thick with emotion. "Barely, but yes." Someone thrust a wool coat into his hands. Cruz wrapped the puppy carefully, cocooning it in layers of warmth. The tiny creature whimpered, its body shivering violently. Its breathing came in short, desperate gasps, fighting for every breath against the cold that had seeped into its fragile bones. Bandit pressed closer, his large body creating a windbreak. He licked the puppy's tiny head with long, gentle strokes, his tail wagging slowly. The maternal instinct in the hardened military dog was almost heartbreaking to witness. Cruz cradled the bundle against his chest, feeling the faint flutter of the puppy's heartbeat against his palm. "We need to get it warm. Now! Does anyone have—" "Here!" An older woman rushed forward with a thermos. "Hot water bottle. My arthritis." She unscrewed the cap, testing the temperature against her wrist before nodding. "Not too hot. Wrap it close." Cruz positioned the warm thermos near the puppy's body, careful not to burn the delicate skin. The puppy's shivering began to slow, its breathing deepening slightly. That's when he noticed it. Something else tucked into the folds of Bradley's uniform, something that had been hidden beneath where the puppy had lain. Cruz reached in carefully, his fingers closing around a small object, a dog tag. But not Bradley's regulation tags. This one was smaller, made of brass that had been polished to a mirror shine. Cruz lifted it into the light, and his throat tightened as he read the inscription. On one side, engraved in careful, precise letters, "Hope." He turned it over. On the reverse side, in Bradley's distinctive handwriting, were words that made Cruz's vision blur with tears. "If you're reading this, Bandit found her. She's why I couldn't come home. But she gets to live because of what we stand for. Take care of her. Take care of him. He's a good boy. He'll know what to do. Bradley." Cruz's hands shook as he held the tag. Around him the chapel had fallen into stunned silence. Even the sounds of weeping had faded into breathless anticipation. "There's more," someone whispered. Cruz looked back into the casket. Tucked beside Bradley's hand was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, the creases worn soft from being handled repeatedly. He picked it up with reverent fingers and unfolded it. Bradley's handwriting covered the page, hasty but legible, as if written in the final moments before. Cruz's voice cracked as he began to read aloud. To whoever finds this, her name is Hope. I found her 3 days ago, abandoned in a collapsed building during our mission. Her mother didn't make it. I couldn't leave her behind. I couldn't. Bandit and I kept her alive as long as we could. If something happens to me, please, give her the life she deserves. And tell Bandit he's the best partner I could have asked for. Tell him he did good. The last words were smudged, as if water had fallen on the ink. Cruz's voice wavered as he continued reading, but he forced himself to speak clearly so every person in the chapel could hear Bradley's final words. I know this seems crazy. I know protocol says we can't bring anything back that isn't mission critical. But when I held this puppy in my hands, when I felt her heartbeat against my palm, I couldn't walk away. She was alone in the rubble, crying for a mother who would never come. Her siblings were already gone. She was the only one left. Cruz paused, swallowing hard. Around him, mourners pressed handkerchiefs to their faces. Even the funeral director had tears streaming down his cheeks. Bandit and I, we made a choice. We kept her warm in my jacket during the transport back to base. We fed her with an eyedropper I borrowed from the med tent. We took turns staying awake to make sure she kept breathing. For 3 days, she was our mission, not the one they assigned us, but the one that mattered. The puppy stirred in Cruz's arms, letting out a soft squeak. Bandit's ears perked forward, and he nuzzled the bundle gently. I got injured on day 3. The blast came out of nowhere. I knew it was bad. I could feel it. But all I could think about was this little life I was carrying. I made Bandit a promise. If something happened to me, he would find a way to tell someone about her. He would make sure she survived. Cruz's throat tightened, but he pushed through. I trained him for it. In those final hours, while the medics worked on me, while everything started going dark, I kept whispering to him, find her, Bandit, alert, show them. Don't let them close the box until someone knows. I placed her against my chest under my medals where she'd stay warm, where she'd be hidden, where only someone who truly looked would find her. A sob broke through the silence. Bradley's widow had collapsed into her father-in-law's arms, her shoulders shaking. I know it sounds impossible. I know people will think I was delirious, that the injury made me irrational. But in my last conscious moments, I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about this puppy, this tiny, innocent life that deserved a chance. And I was thinking about Bandit, my partner, my brother. I knew he wouldn't let me down. He never has. Cruz looked up from the letter, his eyes finding Bandit's. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, his gaze steady and knowing. If you're reading this, it means Bandit did exactly what I asked him to do. It means my final mission was a success. Please, whoever you are, give Hope the life she deserves and tell Bandit he's the best damn dog in the Air Force. The paper trembled in Cruz's hands as he read the final line. Tell him he's a good boy. Tell him I love him. Airman First Class Bradley. Cruz folded the letter carefully and looked down at Bandit. The transformation was immediate and profound. The frantic energy that had driven the German shepherd to claw at the casket, to bark with desperate urgency, to fight against every hand that tried to pull him away. All of it vanished in an instant. Bandit's entire body relaxed, his muscles unwinding from their coiled tension. His ears, which had been pinned back in distress, now stood at alert but calm attention. His mission was complete. Cruz knelt, bringing the bundled puppy down to Bandit's level. You did it, boy, he whispered, his voice breaking. You did exactly what he asked you to do. Bandit's tail began to wag, slow and deliberate. He stepped forward, his massive head lowering until his nose touched the blanket wrapped around Hope. He sniffed carefully, thoroughly, as if confirming what he already knew in his bones. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a powerful animal, he licked the puppy's tiny face. Hope responded with a weak but clear whimper, her miniature paw emerging from the blanket to bat at Bandit's nose. The gesture was instinctive, playful even in her weakness. Bandit's tail wagged faster, and a sound emerged from his throat. Not a bark or a whine, but something closer to a rumble of contentment, of relief. He circled Cruz twice, his body language completely changed. Where before he'd been a dog in crisis, now he moved with purpose and confidence. He sat beside Cruz, pressed against his leg, his eyes never leaving the bundle in Cruz's arms. This was his charge now, his responsibility, the final gift his partner had left him. Around them, the chapel had transformed. The rigid formality of grief had shattered, replaced by something more complex and beautiful. Mourners who had been frozen in their pews now moved closer, drawn by the miracle unfolding before them. Tears still flowed, but they were different now, mixed with wonder, with awe, with a profound understanding of what they'd just witnessed. He knew, someone whispered. Bradley knew Bandit would understand. He trained him for this, another voice added. Even in his final moments, he was thinking about saving a life. Bradley's widow approached slowly, her hands shaking as she reached toward Cruz. "May I?" Cruz carefully transferred the puppy into her arms. She gasped at the fragile weight, at the tiny heartbeat fluttering against her palms. Bandit immediately moved to her side, his body pressed protectively against her leg, his eyes fixed on Hope. "He saved her," she breathed, looking from the puppy to Bandit to the casket where her husband lay. "Even dying, he saved her." Bandit leaned his head against her hip, and she stroked his ears with one trembling hand, while cradling Hope with the other. The German shepherd's eyes closed briefly, and for the first time since the funeral began, his breathing became slow and even. He could rest now. His promise was kept. 3 weeks later, the base veterinary clinic buzzed with quiet activity. In a private room bathed in afternoon sunlight, Hope lay curled in a soft bed, her tiny body now stronger, healthier. Her eyes, once clouded and barely open, now shone with clarity and curiosity. She gained weight, her ribs no longer visible beneath her puppy fur, and her legs had grown steady enough to carry her in wobbly explorations around the room. Beside her bed, taking up most of the floor space, lay Bandit. He hadn't left her side except for necessary walks and meals. Even then, he'd return within minutes, his anxiety visible, until he could see Hope again, could confirm with his own eyes that she was still breathing, still safe. The veterinarian, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, watched them through the observation window. "I've never seen anything like it," she told Lieutenant Cruz, who stood beside her. "He's been the perfect guardian. When she cries, he alerts us immediately. When she sleeps, he positions himself between her and the door. It's like he's still on duty." Cruz nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "He is on duty. Bradley gave him a mission, and Bandit intends to see it through." Inside the room, Bradley's widow Sarah sat on the floor beside Bandit. She'd come every day since the funeral, spending hours with Hope and the dog who'd saved her. In her lap, she held a folder of paperwork, adoption papers, veterinary records, and one official military document. "I spoke with the base commander," Sarah said softly, stroking Hope's tiny head with one finger. The puppy yawned, revealing needle-sharp teeth, then snuggled deeper into her blanket. "They're approving Bandit's retirement. He'll come home with me. With us." Bandit's tail thumped against the floor once, twice. Sarah looked at the German shepherd, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know you miss him. God, I miss him too. Every single day. But he left us something, didn't he? He left us each other. He left us her." She reached out, running her hand along Bandit's back. The dog leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, he looked at Hope, then at Sarah, then back to Hope. His purpose was clear, his path forward, defined. "We're going to raise her together," Sarah continued, her voice stronger now. "You and me. We're going to give her the life Bradley wanted for her, and we're going to heal, all three of us." Hope stirred, letting out a squeaky yawn. Immediately, Bandit's head lifted, his eyes alert. But Hope simply stretched her tiny paws, rolled onto her back, and fell back asleep, her belly rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Bandit relaxed, resting his chin on his paws, but his eyes remained open, watchful. Outside the window, Cruz smiled through his tears. "He's going to be okay," he said quietly. Dr. Chen nodded. "They all are, because of what Bradley did, because of what Bandit refused to give up on." In the quiet room, surrounded by light and warmth, a widow, a warrior dog, and a tiny puppy named Hope began their journey forward. Together, healing, and honoring the man who'd made it all possible. If you like this video and want to see more just like it, then make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these incredible stories reach.